Datura, also known as Jimson Weed, isn't like most hallucinogens. It doesn't open your mind, it tears it apart. Scientifically, Datura works by blocking acetylcholine, one of the brain's main neurotransmitters responsible for memory, movement, and awareness. Without it, your brain can't separate dreams from reality. The result isn't vivid colors or fractals, it's full-blown delirium. People on Datura hold conversations with people who aren't there, wander for days without knowing it, and often wake up in hospitals, or worse. There's no high, just confusion, fear, and complete loss of control. For some, it's described as a spiritual test. For most, it's a one-way trip into madness. These are real stories from people who took Datura and came back forever changed. If you enjoy dark deep dives like this one, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel grow. Friend went tripping and never came back. A friend of ours, let's call him Rich, drank a tea brewed from Datura flowers, Sydney, Australia, that were growing in a neighbor's yard. He had been warned that it was a bad idea. Let me preface this by saying that before he consumed this tea, he was a reasonably rational person. Although considered somewhat eccentric, he was 20 years old and was attending Macquarie University at time. The tea was brewed at Deleted, and we lived about 15 miles away. At about 2 a.m. in the morning, Rich shows up in his underwear, boxers, and a t-shirt, at our door babbling about his mother needing money for the holiday. We looked outside and saw a cab waiting. I went out and asked the cabbie what was going on. He told me that our friend had hailed him at Hyde Park in the city center and asked to be taken to our place. He was babbling incoherently, and the cabbie felt sorry for him. Australians are like that. Ask no questions, just help him out, and took a chance. I paid the cabbie for the ride and went inside. Rich starting saying that his room was the living room, and that he wanted all the people to leave so he could something or other. Let's just say it was nonsense, because there were only 3 of us there. After about 60 minutes of babbling, he went into the kitchen where he was talking to the tea tin while shaking his fist violently at the refrigerator. He mysteriously turned and went out the back door and then started talking to the orchids. We were considering taking him to hospital, but let him into a spare bedroom and watched him overnight. He remained in a weird state for at least another 24 hours. My girlfriend took a day of work to watch him. After he stopped his babbling, he became very quiet and would not talk to anyone. We later learned that he had visited several other people during that night, mysteriously leaving at some point. No one knows how he got to Hyde Park. He did strange things such as pulling out his penis and investigating it closely for hours, pretending to be eating and drinking things, talking to inanimate objects. The list goes on and on. The sad thing is that after this episode he became psychotic and refused to talk to anyone for about 2 years. His life was ruined, and he wandered from friend's house to friend's house looking for food and shelter. He effectively became a hobo, disappearing for months on end. After a few years, he began talking to people and learned what had happened. He was very ashamed, but still remained somewhat psychotic. He has never returned from that holiday. We are posting this to let others know of how dangerous this stuff is, and to stay away from it. Dark and hopeless hell. When I was 18, I was in a strange place in the world. I was homeless, penniless, and with no real ambition to pull myself out of the gutter. Although I was without the basic necessities of food and shelter, I had a steady supply of drugs that were dispensed, I suppose, out of sympathy by many of my friends. I went to sleep hungry and cold every night, but never sober. One evening, before I left a party to hit the streets to find a broom closet or stairwell to lay my head, a guy I barely knew gave me a large freezer bag full of brown spiky pods. What are these? Jimson Weed. The seeds will make you trip. Maybe you can sell them. I don't want them. He told me to split the pod open and eat half of the seeds if I really wanted to trip hard. To me, that meant eat the whole pod, since I always found recommended dosages to be unsatisfying. I chose not to dose that night, since I was already tired and afraid I might fall asleep before the trip kicked in. I slept in a building gutted by a fire a few years before, and the freezing November air woke me just before dawn. I got up and walked into town to raise my body temperature and avoid hypothermia. This was my daily morning ritual. Obviously, 5 a.m. in a small city offers very little in terms of recreation, so I decided it was the right time to open the door of perception and began my day with a psychedelic breakfast. I chose the largest pod in the bag, which was also the darkest in color. I was told afterward the most potent seeds are the deepest brown. The seeds were terribly bitter, and many of the shells got stuck in my teeth. I managed to finish the entire pod with a little help from a public water fountain. I watched a beautiful sunrise from the roof of an apartment building, constantly waiting for the effects of the Jimson Weed to take effect. I can't say how long I sat until the seeds started working, but the first noticeable signs came in the form of extreme thirst and general physical discomfort. Finding the feelings of seeming dehydration too strong to ignore, I went to a nearby McDonald's for free ice water. It must have been after 9, because the only people in the restaurant were old guys getting free refills on senior citizen discounted coffee. I sat in a booth in the back corner, sipping water through a cracked straw, watching the thirsty elderly redneck parade. It didn't take long for me to realize I was entering into a very hallucinogenic trip. The fact that I hadn't eaten a real meal in a week and I was sleep-deprived probably added to the drug's intensity, but I can't imagine a big dinner and a full 8 hours would have made too much of a difference. Unlike the onset of an E or acid trip, my mental state was very comfortable, but my physical condition felt quite unhealthy. The heavy sense of inebriation was quickly followed by powerful, disorienting visuals. Though they weren't disturbing, they seemed as clear as sunlight. Black cats milled about the floor in front of me, so numerous I couldn't even see the tile. They appeared wet and angry. There was deep crimson blood dripping from the ceiling. Everything was technicolor. The sense of detachment was strong, but it didn't feel strange. Each hallucination flowed into the next. I was holding a very old Bible in my lap. I couldn't figure out how to open it. Soon it started to leak blood too. The more I struggled, the more it bled. As soon as I realized my efforts were futile, the book materialized into the air around me. It didn't seem strange to me. When I analyzed the room again, it was a bustling, futuristic metropolis. It appeared very large and very alien, with shining chrome and flashing lights everywhere. I began to feel discomfort and the strong urge to urinate simultaneously. I staggered into the bathroom and vomited in the closest urinal right in front of an Amish man. Now I live in south-central Pennsylvania, so it's very possible that he was really there. But considering my state and other people's accounts of Datura-induced visuals, I suspect he was just a hallucination. I do know that I relieved myself somewhere in the bathroom and left through the side exit adjacent to the lavatory door. The street outside was a scene of World War II ravaged Europe. I don't know which country, but everyone on the street was garbed in Nazi military uniform. I felt very threatened. I ran into the alley behind the parking lot and hid behind a pine tree. The anxiety soon ebbed, but the thirst and need to urinate returned. I knew I needed a comfort zone, a place I could relax in. A friend lived nearby. I walked to his apartment complex and stood in front of the stairwell. The same crimson blood from the McDonald's was cascading down the steps. It began to rise over my shoes, up my legs. A heavy sense of vertigo came over me. There's a memory gap between the stairs and my friend's apartment, but I ended up on his couch watching dolphins dive through the wall in a seamless loop. During my time there, I experienced the typical non-existent cigarette search and the disappearing person puzzle. I visited the bathroom many times, but eliminated very little. The sense of dehydration was unbearable. There was no comfort. I didn't recognize the people in the room. I asked the person closest to me where Bill was. "Bill's not here," was the return. I closed my eyes to escape the growing sense of panic, but when my eyelids shut, all I saw was a new room with new people. Where was I? I tried to reopen my eyes, but it only revealed another room with yet more strangers. This went on and on. I didn't know if my eyes were open or shut. I didn't know where I was, what time it was, or what was happening. My panic turned into sensory collapse. Everything bled together, and I felt a deep, spiraling sensation engulf me. I lost all visual capabilities, but I still had a very real sense of touch. I was trapped in a small, metallic box. It made perfect sense to me. I was dead. This was hell. There were no demons, no hellfire or brimstone, just a deep, complete feeling of darkness and hopelessness. This was the never-ending void, not at all how I had imagined it, but worse than I thought that it could have been. I've had feelings of infinite emotion on acid trips and sensations of universal truth in K-holes, but this was the most profound reality I had ever experienced. My whole existence was put into perspective, and I was being punished for wasting the gift of life. I blacked out at some point in the box and woke up in my friend's apartment the next day. He said I was out for about 8 hours. The physical effects wore off about a day later, but the psychological impression has yet to fade. Datura is boundless. Datura is powerful beyond words. Datura is poison. That terrified naked man in the corner is me. I'll start with a little background. This is a detailed report of a trip that spans the course of 3 days. I am not 100% sure on all of the details of the trip, as I can't truly recall everything. Clues I found in my house after the trip help though, and chronologically this story is quite accurate. Background. A friend and I have been serious into drugs for years now. We'll call him Chris. Between the two of us, we've tried nearly every drug that could even be slightly considered recreational. Drugs many of you have likely never heard of. Then came inevitability. Deliriance. The day finally came where there were just no drugs left to try. After reading extensively, we turned to deliriance. It was all that was left to try. We meticulously grew and picked Datura plants that we had grown and cultivated over an indeterminate stretch of time. The day came when the plant was ready to be ingested. We separated a significant portion of seeds, 600 apiece. Looking back, the dose was absolutely ridiculous, and we are very, very lucky to be alive. I should be a dead man right now. The mentality behind the dose was something along the lines of, we're too experienced not to do this much, and our bodies are too used to drugs, etc. Essentially, we were too tough for Datura, and thus took a very stupid dose and a very stupid risk. The trip. Day 1. T plus 00 to T plus 100. Jen, a friend of mine, came over to sit with us. We ingested 600 seeds each as quickly as possible and washed them down with a glass of milk. We then locked all the doors and windows to my house as to prevent any drug-induced rampages, police run-ins, or worse. Chris and I plopped down in front of my new big screen and began watching a movie. About an hour into it, I started to feel the effects. The dry mouth came on, as in other trip reports. I had no idea it would be this strong. My legs felt like rubber, and my body was completely out of whack. I looked over to Chris to tell him it was kicking in, and I found even this simple task disorienting. He confirmed the same experience thus far. In what was the stupidest move of the century, Jen decided she was bored and that she would take 150 seeds. Now she's had her experiences with drugs before, but she was our sitter. T plus 300. As time passed, it seemed to stretch. Much like a DXM trip, I lost all reference of time. The only indicator was a digital clock, which would have been impossible to read if it weren't for the large readout. The movie had since finished, and the television was airing some show about cops. I honestly couldn't tell you what it was I was watching, but all the lights and colors melded into this visual supernova that I couldn't stop staring at. Chris grunted strangely, and I looked over to see him sliding off the couch. I became frightened because at that very moment, the room had vanished. We were stranded on a couch in a burning hallway. I grabbed Chris and pulled him back onto the couch so that he wouldn't get burned. He looked at me with his massive pupils and spoke an unrecognizable string of words. Time slowed as he spoke. His voice echoed in slow motion, and his pupils expanded beyond his eyes, spiraling toward me. I was intrigued at what I was seeing when Jen grabbed my shoulder from the other couch. She was engulfed in flames and ran from the couch up into my bedroom. I laid on my bed trying to make sense of everything when I saw a man looking in through my window. Unable to make out his face, I was frightened. It was dark outside, and I was on the second floor. Impossible, but I believed it. T+500. Jen opened the door to my room. She shouted something and laid next to me. Her face twisted and turned as I stared, and I couldn't remember where we were. T+800. I must have blacked out because 3 hours had passed, and I was still lying with Jen in my bed. Only we were now both naked. Did we have sex? Why was I naked? What happened? I had no explanation, but somehow I didn't seem to need one. We tried to have sex, which is weird in itself since we had never so much as kissed before this. I was too far gone to know what I was doing, and then I went black again. T+1100. I came to. Sprawled on my bedroom floor, I was now by myself. I noticed a residue on my body, leading me to believe that we had sex, but Jen was nowhere to be found. I walked into the kitchen looking for her, but there was no kitchen beyond my bedroom door. I stepped into a supermarket, only it was closed, and there was no food on the shelves. I ran back downstairs into the TV room, where I had last seen Chris. The room was black. I saw nothing but a body hovering in midair. It was Chris, who seemed to be sleeping. T+1200. I decided I needed a cigarette. Interestingly enough, I had one in my ear at the time. I smoked it and took another one from my now reloaded ear. Where were these coming from? T+1300. I grew tired, but I still hadn't found Jen. I walked upstairs, and immediately upon opening the door, I needed to lie down. I thought I was in some kind of endless field, and that I was sleeping on the grass. There, I slept for almost 20 hours. T+33 minutes. I awoke, still hallucinating. I didn't know where I was or how I had gotten there, but it seemed to be a house that wasn't my own. I proceeded into the living room to come across a naked woman, Jen. She sat in her chair, talking to nobody. When I entered the room, she saw me and immediately took off running. Where did she go? Who was she? T+35 minutes, and I needed to leave. I was in a strange house and I was stuck. I ventured into what I thought was a bedroom. It turned out to be a balcony. On the balcony, I found a man's clothing, but no man. Were these mine? I looked out into the backyard, and there on the ground was a man, naked. Somebody had fallen. Luckily, they landed in the water. T+36 minutes. I proceeded into the next room, intrigued as if I were investigating some deserted mansion. A radio hummed, though I saw no radio. I noticed a sliding glass door to the back and tried to open it. This was a strange door, and I couldn't seem to open it. I felt trapped. I knew it was some kind of illusion. I jumped through it, and I was right. There was nothing there, and I was finally outside, free from the prison. There was a truck on the side of the road that I noticed from where I was standing. I decided to hitch a ride and try to get back home. I jumped into the bed of the truck and waited. Shortly thereafter, the driver got in, and we were off. I laid still so not to attract attention, when all of a sudden a friend of mine from high school appeared. I hadn't seen him in ages, but he was going to blow my cover. I remembered I was naked, and I didn't want him to see me. I tried to close my eyes, but he was still there. I shouted and tried to struggle with him, but he disappeared. T plus question mark. Question mark, question mark. The truck stopped. I was found out. The driver got out and saw me. He had no facial features, no mouth, no nose, no eyes. I jumped from the bed and began to run, naked and scared. This is my last memory. There is no further evidence as to what happened after this point, but I awoke hours later, finally somewhat sober. I opened my eyes, and there were 3 people staring at me. I was naked, bleeding, and covered in my own feces. I huddled in the corner of whatever room I was in. It was a family. They found me and tried to keep me safe. I was in southern New Hampshire after starting in Maine. I was almost 3 hours from my home with no recollection of how I got there. The family offered me clothing and enough money to take the bus back home. Aftermath. I returned home to find my house in ruins. The sliding glass door I had imagined was my bedroom window. Chris was lying on the ground in my yard after falling from the second floor. He had no clothing on. He was alive, but broke his right leg. I found Jen in my bathtub, still naked and sleeping. My life was hysteria for 48 hours. I'm not sure how all three of us survived that trip. Hellishly fantastical. It was the summer after graduation, and it was the summer in a lot of ways. I had a lot of money and a carefree attitude. One fateful day, my friend Drew and I met a friend, Jay, by chance in a park, and he told us about how his cousin had given him some kind of strange plant, and you can apparently trip out from it. I was up for pretty much anything, minus heroin and meth. I had vaguely heard of Jimson Weed before, but wasn't very knowledgeable about it, other than from reading Castaneda. We said sure, and drove to Jay's house. First we smoked a joint, and then we divvied up the 2 pods between the 3 of us. The seeds were little, clear, and somewhat bitter. We decided we didn't want to waste any of the plant, so we brewed a tea with the shells and drank it. Then we peeled off the inside skins of the pods and ate that, and finally we smoked the outer shell. Then we smoked another joint. During the first 20 minutes, nothing too noticeable happened. Colors seemed more vibrant, and my throat was getting kind of dry. When I went to the bathroom to pee, very little actually came out. Jay decided we should go to a different nearby park, as his parents would be coming home soon. As we were walking to the park, basically, I felt the effects of being poisoned. I had jello legs, and my eyes couldn't focus on anything specific for very long. When we got to the park, we walked over and basically slumped down at a picnic table. At this point, my throat was painfully dry. We had a jug of water, which I kept drinking voraciously. I also really had to pee. I walked in a secluded area behind some bushes and tried. Nothing. Frustrated, I jello walked back to the table, and our friend G was randomly there. He was driving past and saw us. As he was talking to us, he could tell we were different and lackadaisical. "Oh, I know what you guys took," he said, and started laughing. I could barely look at him. He told us to call him later and tell him how our experience was. Then some girl came and sat down at the table and started talking to us. There's a school nearby, so there's lots of people in and out of the park. I don't remember what she said to us. Jay said he had to go home, and we thanked him for the Datura. Drew suggested we leave too, and we got in the Montero and left. Then the unadulterated insanity began. Note: do not drive whilst on Jimson Weed, ever. We left at about 4 p.m. We pulled up to Drew's house around 9 to 9:30, with no memory of what happened in between. None at all. Anyway, as we pulled into Drew's street, we noticed a lot of our friends' cars lined up around his house. There appeared to be a party going on. We assumed it had something to do with Drew's brother. As we pulled in his driveway, the neighbor's cat ran right in front of us. We felt a bump and knew Drew had just run it over. He felt really bad about it. We walked inside, and sure enough, there's a party going on. We see about 20 or so of our friends drinking, laughing, being loud. There were also strangers. Drew excused himself and went into his room, as he felt bad about the cat still. I was talking with some friends, and I noticed my friend Preston, who was there, was crying blood. It looked like eyeshadow, a blood circle around his eyes. It was horrifically bizarre, and he looked like he was in pain. "Are you okay?" I asked, and he just stared at me with an almost evil gaze, blood dripping from his face to the floor. I saw grotesque people I didn't recognize, who looked like Sloth from the Goonies, but not in a comical way at all. They looked deformed, bruised, beaten, and burned as they shuffled around the house. Some were laughing maniacally, some crying, others just staring. It was unsettling to say the least. Things were also painted on. It's like a dream, and the 3D world is irrelevant. There were burnt cigarettes and tacks sticking sharp side up on the ground, and bizarre-looking plants pasted to the walls and doors. I then saw people with beet red skin, crying blood. They looked like what you would expect demons to look like, just like every fairy tale or myth or religious text makes them out to be, minus perhaps wings. None of this seemed particularly odd to me at the time. I was confused who they were, but wasn't gripped with fear like I probably would have been was I sober. Some of these entities were having passionate, crazy sex in the back room, but they didn't look as if were they actually enjoying themselves. I kept hearing the sound of doors slamming. Drew came down to see what I was up to, and our friend Preston started talking to the both of us. "You guys are late. We were waiting for you," he said. "We didn't know this was going on," said Drew. "Where's Kyle?" I asked. Kyle is Drew's brother. "I haven't seen him yet," Preston replied. We talked, just the three of us, for a couple minutes, and then Drew excused himself to the bathroom. He couldn't pee the entire time either, and our throats were probably the driest they had ever been. It hurt to swallow. Then I met the spirit of the plant, Queen Tolawach, as she is known indigenously and shamnically. She was pale, not just albino pale, but literally skin tone like the moon, and imperious. She is also fond of tricks. I talked to her for a bit, though I will not share the conservation, as I feel by doing so is disrespectful. I sat on the floor, still noticing the tacks, which shimmered in my peripheral. My friend Chloe walked in through the kitchen, looking frail, beaten, and toothless. She explained that a group of Mexicans had just beaten and gang-raped her. I looked over at a towel and a clear cylinder on the table, only I didn't see the towel. I saw a talking head, and this head was Chloe's. She was crying hysterically, and Toloch told me to give her a hug, which I did. I was literally hugging a beach towel in plastic. "Oh my God, Sam, what the fuck?" She gut-wrenchingly yelped, and then started crying. At this point, I honestly didn't know what to do, but my bladder felt like it was going to explode, so I said I'd be back and went downstairs to the bathroom. Drew's mom was playing solitaire on the computer and said hello to me. I waved and went into the bathroom. Chloe was sitting in the corner of the ceiling, laughing scarily. When I walked to the toilet, Chloe was standing in my way. "Chloe, can you please move? I have to pee like a racehorse." She just stared for a second and laughed. "Chloe, if you don't move, I'm going to pee on you." She just laughed again, louder. So that's what I tried to do. Again, almost nothing came out, but I did feel better. I went back upstairs. My dad was there randomly. He opened the front door and said, "Come on, kid, let's went." I wasn't expecting to see him there at all. "I'll meet you in the car." "All right," I thought, and went outside. He was nowhere to be found. I did see my friend Tom, though, in an orange car parked right outside. He beckoned me to get in. I couldn't. The door was locked. He kept waving me inside. "I can't," I said. Then Tom started laughing, and this actually irritated me. "Forget it," I shouted at him. I was confused where my dad went, so I sat by myself on the curb. The house across the street has a wood stovetop chimney on the roof, but I saw someone committing suicide by hanging himself instead. It was like an animated GIF. When my eyes moved at all, it would reset. When they stayed focused, the man walked off the roof with a noose and hung there, waving in the breeze. I should have mentioned this earlier, but all straight lines shook, like an episode of Dr. Katz. Everything flickered, actually, like I was witnessing the erosion of time. I had seen that kind of thing before while on strong acid. Just the lines, not anything else. I look next to me, I'm still on the curb, and my friend Mike is by my side. "What's your problem, man?" he asked. "I don't honestly know, dude," I said. "I took this plant earlier, and now I can't tell exactly what's going on." He looked at me quizzically. "That's fine and all, and that would be a good excuse if you weren't being such an asshole right now." I felt like I was an asshole, ruining everyone's time, and I didn't know why. I glanced in Drew's Montero and saw possibly the scariest thing out of this whole experience. There was a pale creature with no eyelids, with the most piercing stare I have ever seen in my entire life, sitting in the front passenger seat. His head was shaped almost like a shark's, pointing at the top, and he had no lips, and sharp, shark-like teeth. In fact, it looked exactly like the Hellraiser character Butterball, minus the sunglasses and paler. Just like in the movie, he said nothing. I had seen Hellraiser once before, when I was like 12, and remembered near to nothing from it. It wasn't until I saw that movie again that I made the connection. In fact, I'm fairly confident Clive Barker has taken Datura before, after going through this experience, and the fact he wore sunglasses in the movie, and in reality, call it what you will, had no eyelids at all, seems more than a coincidence to me. This powerful entity was the only one I could not look at straight in the face. I tried avoiding his gaze the entire time. I looked at a tree in the front yard. I could see a ghostly essence in the tree itself. Actually, I could see the essence of all plant life. Chloe was right by that tree, falling over. I rushed to go help her, but she was painted on a tall piece of dead grass, blowing flimsily in the wind. I needed to pee again. I went inside through the garage, and somehow Chloe had beaten me there, and was crying on a coat rack. "I don't want to live anymore," she cried, and it was apparent to me that she was hanging herself. "Chloe, no," I said sorrowfully, and reached to bring her down. It wasn't Chloe. It was just a coat. I put the coat back and entered the kitchen. Kyle was there. "Yo, Samwise, how's it going?" I actually thought about that question and laughed. "I don't know. How are you doing, Drew?" I asked a piece of paper which I thought was Drew, blowing from the fan. Kyle looked at me like I was the biggest dumbass in the world, and I don't blame him one bit. I went to the upstairs bathroom and the light didn't work, and the darkness seemed to make the vision stronger. The toilet seat was swirling, and it was fairly hypnotizing. I also saw what looked like a ghost or shadow creature on the floor next to the toilet, outlined by a translucent silver. He was completely two-dimensional and appeared to be asking for my help, though I couldn't actually hear anything he was saying. I finally peed, at least more than I had yet, and felt immensely better, though I felt sorry for the shadow creature. It was kind of a dusty bathroom, and there were glowing insects attracted to the dust. They looked like ants, mini spiders, and other insects which probably don't exist, and they looked bioluminescent. I put my finger on the ground and let one crawl onto my finger. I examined it more closely, and its movements were that exactly like a bug's would be. It had feelers, and was feeling me. I clamped my fingers together lightly, and the insect crumbled like dust, its legs floating spirally to the ground. I went back downstairs, and Tolowach, still on the couch, asked, "Did you see the life upstairs?" I nodded. I looked around. Demons and deformed burn victims were still walking around nonchalantly. I went upstairs into Drew's room to see how he was doing. He was watching TV with Mike. Then we noticed the neighbor's yard via the window. It too was bizarre. There was a four-legged dog creature, very large and very black, with glowing red eyes, sitting on what looked like a throne, on the side of a swimming pool. There were many people basically having a blood orgy, and massive amounts of steam were rising from the water. There were also dead squirrels, which littered the ground, and all throughout the branches of a large tree were squirrel tails, hanging like evil Christmas ornaments. The dog, whom I later found out is the second spirit associated with Datura, or second half, depending on perspective. He is known sometimes as the Guardian, or Protector, and protects Tolowach, noticed us and beckoned us to come join them beyond the fence. Drew grabbed his binoculars and scoped out the scene. People were still having insatiable sex through a bunch of mist. However, with the binoculars, we saw everything in grave detail. I could see the hair on this demonic dog, and the squirrel tails, and everything in clear, high-def detail. Me and Drew saw the same thing. Drew left to get a closer look, the dog and associates still beckoning us in. Drew went to the fence line as I stayed upstairs watching with the binoculars. Drew almost jumped the fence to join them, but I tapped on the window and shook my head. He came back up. We were tired and wanted to go to sleep. Drew has bunk beds, and Mike called the top bunk. I said fine, but asked that he at least give me my sleeping bag. He said no. "Just give him his sleeping bag, Mike," Drew said. "No." I tried pulling it from him, but to no avail. Annoyed, I gave up and went in the guest room trying to sleep, as a spy vs. spy creature watched over me, which was very unsettling. I didn't actually sleep, and woke up at around 7:30. I decided to read up on Datura. Only when I got to the computer to do so, I couldn't read text. My vision was okay, but when I tried reading text smaller than billboard size, it was out of focus. This lasted for 2 more days, and during this time I thought I was never going to be able to read again. Same with Drew. In fact, the trip lasted altogether for 3 days, and residues of it, like my eyes playing tricks on me, lasted for almost 2 weeks. I'll cut the other 2 days out, as it's already been a fairly verbose story. I shall summarize some, though. Everyone was worried about us. They thought we were never coming down, and to be fair, neither did we. We saw Dr. Seuss creatures in trees, elves, gnomes, dwarves, pixies, demons, golems, all kinds of mythical, demonic, spiritual creatures. And everything Drew saw, I saw, and vice versa. We ran over a ghost with a car. Digital clocks would make Tamagotchi-like animations. It looked 8-bit. The auditory hallucinations did stop after the first night, the visuals mostly after the 3rd night. On the 3rd day, me, Drew, and a group of our friends went into a gazebo, a usual smoking spot, in a garden to smoke. I saw gnomes having sex in the trees. Little creatures would slowly bring antennas up out of bushes, and whenever Drew and I would compare what we saw, our friends were like, "That's not fucking there. Stop it." A train went by. We weren't that far from the tracks. And an obese naked woman was having sex with a tree just outside the garden. Every time she went down, the train blew its horn. The train was actually there. Our friends acknowledged that. It was uncanny. She would stay down for 3 seconds, and the train would blow for 3 seconds. This experience has made me think about it every time I hear a train. I ran into Jay a few days later, and he thought we had never left. He hung out with us all throughout the night. Also, amazingly, Drew's parents, who were actually there the entire time, had no idea we were on anything. I don't know how. We were talking to people who weren't there, basically in front of them. We were lucky in that respect. Afterthoughts. First of all, I'd like to say, do not take Jimson Weed. 99.99% of everyone should never take this. It's all too common for someone to get arrested or end up in a psyche ward, or even get shot from walking into someone else's house, not knowing what's going on. It's also very easy to be poisoned to death. People have died from it before. Also, you will be tested by the Spirit S. And if you fail, there can be dire consequences, particularly with the protector, Wolf. It's not a pleasant high. In fact, there is no high. I felt completely normal, despite the craziness I witnessed. It was kind of amazing I remembered taking anything at all. That's not common. I didn't really think twice about what I was seeing, just like I probably don't in a dream. This is clearly a negative plane of existence. I don't know if I believe in hell, but if there is one, this realm surely has some kind of correlation. Also, it has been said that Datura seeks you out, not the other way around. I deeply believe this to be true, and I believe that I was sought out. I think Jay and Drew were caught in the crosshairs. To say this was just all in our minds is hard to justify. We interacted with people who weren't there simultaneously, witnessed the same things, and saw in blaring detail clearer images through binoculars. I omitted much of what happened, largely because of length, and largely because much of what I experienced I consider sacred, particularly some of the conversations. Not holy per se, but sacred. Also, I found that the first encounter with an entheogen/ally sets the tone for the rest of the relationship. Toloach still visits me periodically in my dreams. All in all, I am glad I experienced this, as I learned much, particularly about the nature of realities. Datura isn't a trip, it's a toxin. One that hijacks your mind and traps you in a world that feels just as real as this one. Every year, people mistake it for another hallucinogen, thinking they'll find some kind of spiritual insight. Instead, they find terror, dehydration, paralysis, and days of memories that never actually happened. What makes Datura so terrifying isn't just what it shows you, it's that for a while, you can't tell the difference between illusion and reality. If there's one lesson from these stories, it's this: some doors aren't meant to be opened. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want more stories about the darker side of the human mind, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's next.